Hello once again and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, a very special and warm welcome. Today is the beginning of a series about the religious practices of a number of groups regarding death and funeral customs. These customs are one way of examining what people believe about the meaning of life, about spirituality, and what happens after the event that we call death. What one believes about life and death clearly influences how the deceased person's remains will be processed. Now, I plan to investigate the customs of a number of religions so that you can compare them. I'm beginning with Judaism, and before you ask me, no, I'm not Jewish. My closest connection with Judaism is through acquaintances, so my knowledge has to be considered book learning. So if I pronounce a word wrong or if I use terminology incorrectly, I hope that you'll correct me in the comment section. Now, Judaism, like most other religions, is divided into various groups, and each one presents their faith according to their own tradition and their point of view. So I hope that what I present today will be general enough to cover the bases. You may have had exposure to a different take on these things, and if so, I hope you'll share those with me as well. I refer you to a website called Chabad.org. I'll put it in the description box for a complete and well-organized presentation on these topics. Now, from a Jewish standpoint, life is an integration of the soul and the body. The soul is the self, the real you, united with the body, the physical vehicle, into a single unit. And death, then, is the dissolution of the body and soul into two separate entities. It's a division of the spiritual self from the body. The self is the soul. You are the soul, not the body. This body will eventually fail and disintegrate. The soul is considered eternal and indestructible. Now, the time that we call life is the time when the soul inhabits the physical body and acts through it. This is just one phase of existence. The soul, the real self, precedes the physical body or the physical life, and it extends beyond it. The soul of the person we know and love continues to exist after death. Now, importantly, death is also not the end of the body. One principle of the Jewish faith is the belief in the resurrection of the dead. In the future, in a divinely perfect world to come, the soul will again be restored to a rebuilt and a revitalized body. So the body and the soul are once again fused together as a living being. So while the soul is the higher of the two, it's the spiritual incarnation of the self, the body must be accorded respect. It has been the vessel of the soul. And this understanding of death underlies the Jewish approach to death and mourning. In their own words, Jews say we do everything in our power to sustain life and avoid death, for each and every moment of life is sacred. Yet the moment of death is accepted as the will of God, who decides when the soul's time in the physical world should end. We live as long as God keeps the two entities of body and soul together. We show profound respect for the body, and we seek to create long-lasting memorials to the deceased. Now, the absolute standards for respect for life are found in the Torah. Those are the first 5 books of the Jewish scripture, and they're the basis of much Jewish belief and practice. So because death can sometimes be sudden and sometimes protracted, the Jews are instructed to be careful not to either suspend life or not to extend life unduly or to interrupt the death process. So euthanasia in any form is rejected by Jewish law. On the other hand, medical measures that are used to prolong life, to keep a person alive, but they also prolong suffering, these don't have to be taken. Now, intervention to provide nutrition is an obligation to the Jew, and it is not considered a medical intervention. A person who's preparing for death is encouraged to say a special set of prayers and psalms that are a confession to be recited. And these prayers ask for God's mercy and provide an atonement for the person. It also brings into focus the most important aspect of life, the relationship with God. Now, if death seems imminent, the person should not be left alone, and those remaining with him should recite psalms and should pray for his or her recovery. The person's spouse and children should be in the room, if possible, at the moment of passing, unless they are unable to control their grief. And if possible, a minyan, that's a group of 10 adult Jewish males, all over the age of 13, should be there to recite psalms. Those in the room shouldn't cry loudly because that would be upsetting to the person who is passing. And during the last few moments of life, everyone should remain present. Nobody should leave the room, as a matter of great respect. After the death, the eyes and the mouth of the deceased are closed, and their face should be covered with a sheet. It has been the custom to rend the clothes of the mourners at this time. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. A candle is placed near the head of the deceased, and relatives and friends often ask for forgiveness for anything that they might have done to harm the person during their life. The mirrors in the house are covered. Psalms 23 and 91 are recited. In the room, there's no eating or drinking or smoking. No derogatory remarks are made about the deceased, and there's no singing or playing of music. Then the rabbi is called, who notifies the burial society, the funeral director, and the doctor, who will provide a death certificate. From the moment of death, the deceased is not to be left alone. If it's not appropriate for a family member to stay with the deceased, then it has to be arranged for a watcher to be there at all times. If death occurs on the Sabbath day, Sabbath has its own restrictions, so only the most minimal arrangements are made. Now, Jews are against autopsies. Humans are made in the image of God, and in death, the body still retains that image. So no violence should be done to the image. Of course, there are situations when an autopsy must be done. It's absolutely necessary in cases like murder or suicide or an unexplained death, but this procedure is avoided whenever it's possible. They are also against embalming. A person should be laid to rest naturally. Burial should be within 24 hours if possible because of this. There should be no mutilation of the body, no tampering with the remains, no handling of the body except religious purification. Now, there may be exceptions, of course, as when there's a lengthy delay in the funeral service, or when burial is going to take place overseas, or when for some reason the government authority demands it. The following close relatives are required to mourn, and in the specific ways that will be mentioned: father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, and spouse. And rules govern the conduct of the mourners. He or she cannot eat in the presence of the body. He can't eat meat or drink wine or liquor in any place. He cannot eat a festive meal or attend a party, and must deny luxuries of various types, including the reading of Torah, which is meant to bring joy. The current American funeral system of preparing a body for viewing with fancy garments and hairstyling and makeup, and then holding a wake or a viewing of the body before the funeral, sometimes the night before or 2 days before, to pay last respects. This is totally rejected. It not only mutilates the deceased in a number of ways, but it retards the healthy grief process by presenting the person as though everything was okay, as though they had not actually died but were only sleeping. The physical remains of a Jewish person are purified for burial by the Holy Society or the Burial Society. And in addition to physical cleansing, they recite prayers asking God's forgiveness of the person's sins. Jews are all buried in the same garment, the same type of shroud, a clean white garment of muslin, cotton, or linen. And they are buried in a wooden coffin. Lined interiors of coffins are not encouraged, and sometimes earth from the Holy Land is buried with the coffin. One striking custom that I mentioned earlier is the rending or tearing of a garment prior to the funeral. The requirement for deceased parents is that the tear should expose the heart. This indicates that the person's heart is broken because of their loss. And the same 7 relatives are required to perform this ritual. Now today, this is usually done in the funeral chapel. There are additional guidelines for performing the custom. They're a bit too detailed for this video. Let me just say that a person does not usually wear a new garment, and it is certainly not an undergarment and usually not a coat, but something like a vest or a shirt or a tie. And it is worn during the entire 7-day period when there are guests or visitors at the home. The funeral service is short and simple in nature. It consists of prayers, reading of psalms, and a eulogy by the rabbi, and possible remembrances by others about the deceased. The body is escorted to the cemetery with pallbearers leading a procession from the hearse to the grave site, carrying the casket, and the mourners follow the deceased. At the grave, the casket is lowered into the grave and covered with earth. Each person taking their turn at throwing a shovel full of earth into the grave. After the burial, those attending form parallel lines facing each other, and the mourners solemnly pass through this hallway that they have made as they come away from the site. And the purpose of this is to now redirect concern from the deceased person to ministering to the mourners. Shiva is a ritual mourning pattern, and there are 5 stages of mourning, well defined. The first stage is the period between death and the burial, and it's a time of intense despair. The first 3 days following the burial denote the second stage, and they're devoted to solitary weeping. And visiting the mourners is actually discouraged during these first 3 days because it's too soon to comfort them. The third period of Shiva is 7 days following the burial, the last 4 of which would be the time when visitors would come and express sympathy. The next period is 30 days following the burial. And during this time, the mourner is encouraged to leave the house and slowly reintegrate into society. And the 5th stage is the 12-month period following the death, during which things gradually return to normal. Well, the most common characteristic of the tradition of Jewish mourning is the withdrawal of the mourners to their homes following the death of a close relative. They don't mix socially or participate in any joyful events during that time. Now, texts of the various prayers and scripture readings, plus the guidelines that I've mentioned, are available in many places online if you want to do your own research. And I'll leave a link to one of those below in the description box. Well, the Jewish belief in the sacredness of life and in God's care of both the body and soul of the believer becomes clear in the death and burial customs of their faith. I hope that you enjoyed this video and will join me again next time to study another spiritual movement or religion. In the meantime, leave your comments and questions. I always do my best to answer them if I can. And I'll see you real soon. Bye for now.